welcome to our new investor series. We are doing this weekly, and the whole idea here is to really just answer your questions and also do a little bit of teaching about vacation rentals in particular. So anything else to add?
No.
All right. Okay, so you can't hear anything right now. Trying to fix your speakers. Hey, Nelly. All right, Iowa, San Diego, cool. Ravi from California, Sarasota. All right, hey, Merdellis, hello from Florida, hey. Okay, all right, you can hear.
Okay,
perfect.
Good, let's do it.
Okay, sounds good. So let's see here.
So you guys feel free to talk in the chat amongst yourselves. Well, we're just going to do a little bit of teaching in the beginning, and then we'll answer some questions at the end. And so if this brings up some questions for you about short-term rentals, go ahead and put them in the Q&A section. And at the end, we'll spend probably 15 minutes or so and answer some questions as well about short-term rentals.
Okay. All right.
Anyone own short-term rentals?
Yeah,
here?
good question. Let's turn this up. Okay. Not yet. Okay, not yet. All right, but not yet, but want to. Okay.
Awesome.
All right. So let's see here.
So Kenji's just gonna go and find the presentation.
Sorry, I did have it up, but I don't know what happened to it. I'm sorry. Okay, here we go. Okay, perfect. Okay, here we go. All right, can everyone see that? I see somebody raised a hand. Can everyone see that? You can see the slide says new investor events series. Yeah. Okay, perfect. All right.
Okay, great.
Okay, so today's topic, why most vacation rental owners don't make money. And, I know there's a lot of interest, excitement about vacation rentals or short-term rentals. Some people just call them Airbnbs. There are a lot of different names for them, but I think the reality is that most people don't make money, and there are a lot of people who are actually losing money on their vacation rentals, not just in terms of cash flow every year. So in other words, their expenses exceed the amount of money that they make, but also in terms of the value of their properties going down. And we'll show you an example of how that can happen. All right. All right, so this is what we're going to cover today. We're going to cover what's the worst case scenario that could happen to you if you bought a vacation rental and things didn't go the way you expected. And then we'll also talk about what's the best case scenario. And then also, how can you make the best case scenario more likely to happen, right? Because if there's an outcome that you want, there are probably a number of things that you can do. There might be some things out of your control, but there are probably a number of things that are within your control that can make the best case more likely to happen. And then finally, we're going to go over one of the most important skills in terms of improving the likelihood of the best case scenario happening, which is knowing how to analyze deals. All right, so let's talk through the worst case scenario. So there are a number of things that can happen, and these are things that we've seen happen to members of our semi-retired physician community, other investors that we know. We hear stories all the time of this happening, but the first one and I think one of the most common things that happens to people is that there's vacation rental bans. And these vacation rental bans can occur at the city level. You can also have a property that's within an HOA and the HOA changes the rules. There are probably other scenarios where all of a sudden vacation rentals are shut down. You're not able to rent your property as a vacation rental. And the problem there is that what are you going to do, right? You are depending on all this income. And so what a lot of people end up doing at that point is they rent to a long-term renter. The problem is the long-term renter is not going to bring in as much as you would make as with your property being a short-term rental. You tend to make a lot more money in terms of annual revenue as when your property is a short-term rental. And so that's the problem, is that you have to switch to making it a long-term rental, and all of a sudden your expenses far exceed your income and you're losing money every month and every year. So, and this is the quote here is a quote from one of our students, actually, before they took one of our short-term rental courses. They took a course after this happened, but they closed on a property with the hopes of it being a short-term rental. But unfortunately, 2 months after closing, the city rolled out a moratorium on new short-term rental permits, and they weren't able to get one. And so there was an indefinite ban, and the community was pretty much fed up with short-term rentals because of a lot of noise complaints and other issues. And so the city council banned short-term rentals.
And so one of the keys is, if you're buying a short-term rental in that area, just making sure that you're keeping abreast of new changes in the rules, and make sure that if you're going to buy a property, that you know what's going on, know what's coming down the pipeline. And then if you buy a short-term rental, well, you might also be able to have that backup plan that Kenji was describing, of being able to use it as a long-term rental or a mid-term rental. And so we encourage our people in our community to not only run the numbers as a short-term rental, but oftentimes run the numbers as a long-term rental, and just kind of see how a backup plan would work if they were in that position that it was going to be a long-term rental.
Yeah, and there are 2 different calculators you can use for that. And we're going to go over one of the calculators today, but today's calculator is going to be the short-term rental cash on cash calculator, but there's a long-term rental cash on cash calculator that you can use and download from our site as well. Just a reminder for those of you who are joining us a little later, you can, if you have any questions that come up during while we're giving this short presentation, please put it in the Q&A. So now we're talking about, so let's continue to talk about some of the worst case scenarios that can happen to you if you buy a vacation rental and you don't buy it right. So the property value can drop, and this can happen, with a downturn. If you look at what happened in the last downturn, property values dropped significantly. I'll show you an example of that in the next slide. And then finally, you could buy just a bad deal, right? You might overpay for a property, and because you overpaid, the property doesn't cash flow. And that can happen to you right off the bat. And that may be unintentional. Or maybe some of you guys are just thinking about it as this is our second home, and you're not really treating it as an investment. I mean, if that's the case, then maybe that's okay with you. You can live with that. But I think a lot of people who are buying vacation rentals, they're really thinking about it as an investment, and they're trying to make money off of it. But the problem is they're not doing the proper analysis, they're not doing their due diligence. So therefore, they're buying properties that don't cash flow.
Yeah, and this is really the idea of today, is we want to walk through the short-term rental cash and cash calculator and make sure that we help you guys avoid buying bad deals. And that's what we're going to be going through.
Yep. All right. So this is an example, and I also have another quote from another student, and this student is actually taking our most recent course. And so in her case, what she had was she bought a property in Lake Tahoe, and she can't use it as a short-term rental because the ban's there. And she bought this property pre-2007. And you guys know what happened in 2007 and 2008 was the crash, right? The last recession, the last big recession. I mean, there was a COVID recession, but the last big recession before the COVID recession was back in 2007, 2008. And so for her, she bought it at the peak. So she bought it right here, right? It was actually even a little bit low. And this is El Dorado County. This is where Lake Tahoe is. And so I pulled the data for this area, and this is what happened, right? The properties started dropping here. And look what happened over the following years. The property values continued to drop, and it dropped to the bottom around 2011, 2012. And then look at this, it didn't recover in value until very recently. And that's exactly what she says here. So she says, bought it pre-2007, it never cash flowed, and I couldn't sell it or refi until recently because the value only returned these last 2 years. So just in the last couple of years, the value finally got back to the price that she paid for it. And this is a really kind of stark reality, right? You guys are right here. This is where we are. And so if you don't buy a property right, then you could be in the same situation here where this value drops significantly, and it's going to take how many years? 2007 to 2020. That's like 12, 13 years, right?
And the fact is that single family homes, which is what she bought, are more tied to the market. And so if the market goes down, the tendency is for single family homes to drop in value, and multifamily investment properties are less tied to the market like this. But the idea is if you can buy a property that's cash flowing well, then even if it drops in value, you can afford to hold on to it for many, many years because you're cash flowing. And so you're not in a situation that you have a liability that you're paying out each month to support, but rather you still have a property cash flowing. And so it's not as painful to hold on to it for 15 years because it's making you money the whole time.
Yeah, and this is a great website if you're looking for what if you want to just look at what historical prices in your market, whatever market you choose, you can go to this website and pull the county up and see what happened to home price values over time. All right, now let's switch over to the best case scenario. What can happen if things go right, or you make sure that things go right? And so, the best case scenario is that you make life-changing cash flow, right? And this means tens of thousands of cash flow per property. And in some cases, we know some people who are making over six figures with just one property, right? And so, that's pretty significant. I mean, even one of our short-term rentals, if we were self-managing it, we could be making about $70,000, $80,000 on that one. So the next one is you can shelter your hard-earned income. So if you don't know already, there are some tax benefits with short-term rentals or vacation rentals, and you can shelter your W-2 or 1099 income. And you don't have to quit your job. You don't have to cut back. And that's a real game changer because you can continue to work full time and you can shelter your income at the same time.
And for if whoever's helping us out today can put in the chat the short-term rental long-term plans, which is a podcast we did about talking about the tax benefits that we took with one of our short-term rentals. If you listen to that, you can really get the details of how to do that.
Yeah. And so what a lot of people in our community are doing is, they're kind of looking at vacation rentals as a quick win, right? They're not ready to cut back yet and claim something like real estate professional status. So they say, okay, for the first couple of years of investing in real estate, I'm going to focus on vacation rentals, and I'm going to buy one or two every year. And then I'm going to use that to shelter my W-2 or 1099 income. So then I can use that tax savings that I get back, the tax refund you get back, and put it back into real estate investing. And so it's a really great way. It's a quick win. It's a great way to kind of, turbocharge your growth over those first couple of years without having to cut back on your work. And then the last best case scenario is if you can, in addition to cash flowing, in addition to all the tax savings, you can also figure out a way to force appreciation. And forcing appreciation means that even if there's a downturn, no matter what's going on in the economy, you can actually force that value to go up. And that's, it takes knowledge and skill on how to do that, but there are ways to do that with vacation rentals.
Yeah, and we'll talk about that with this example as well, how we were able to do that.
All right, now let's shift gear to talking about increasing the likelihood of the best case scenario. And so there are a number of things that you can do. And what we're doing is we're focusing on the things that are under your direct control. I mean, I could have put on here in the best case, yeah, you bought your property and, at the bottom of the market, and, you just held on to the property and waited till it rose in value and it's at the top of the market. Like, yeah, that's a great best case scenario, but that's not in your control. So I didn't put that on here. I only put the things that are within your control. And so one of the first things and one of the most important things is knowing what you're doing. And, I can't tell you, I keep seeing, we have a new course going on right now, and we have a lot of new investors in there, and I see them, they're in the process of learning, and that's totally fine. But I can see the point where they have knowledge up to a certain point, and then there's a drop off, right? They don't have an understanding of what's going on. And so there's a lot of uncertainty. And what I always think is that if there's uncertainty and you don't have that confidence, about investing, then you're probably missing some information, and that's what leads to mistakes. And so what you really want to do is you want to get yourself to a point where you're feeling confident, you feel comfortable, you understand how to assess a deal, you understand the downsides, you understand the upsides. You can really analyze a deal, and that's really a true mark of knowing what you're doing. If you feel that confidence, and if you feel that uncertainty, then you probably are missing some information, some knowledge that you need to still gain. The next thing is having a great team, right? And these are the people who are boots on the ground. They're your eyes and ears. This is especially important when you are several thousand miles away from your property. And we know a number of people in our community who are, I'd say actually the majority are actually managing properties long distance.
Managing short-term rentals long distance,
right.
Which probably blows a lot of your minds, right. But it's totally doable.
Self-managing multiple short-term rentals, vacation rentals, long distance, and building their local team. So this means like cleaners, handymen, right? These are the types of people that you need on the ground, somebody who's available 24/7. These are the types of people you need who can help you. And this just happened to us recently. We had to fix something in the laundry, so we needed a way to get them in the house. And luckily, we had set up a door lock system so we can give the handyman a code. They had to go in there for repair. They took pictures. They sent it to us. They let themselves out. We could tell that they closed the door. We locked the door, and we can control all that, right? And so that's what we mean by you have to have the whole system in place so you can manage that repair remotely without being there. The other alternative is actually having somebody who, like a runner, somebody who can go there, open the door, let the handyman in, let them out, and then lock the door, right? You can have somebody like that.
Yeah, and your property manager can do that. Or if you have somebody like a cleaner on your team or a handyman, you can have them do that as well. Yeah. We've done that a lot with one of our properties where we have a property manager.
Another important thing that you can do to increase the likelihood of the best case scenario is know how to mitigate risks. And so we were talking about things like the short-term rental bans. That's a risk that you can actually mitigate by, number one, you could maybe potentially avoiding it in the first place. But I think the other thing is you really need to get the information. You need to understand what's going on in the city. And I think advice that a lot of people talk about is that you're going to have a better chance of avoiding bans if they're already taxes. Like if the city is already taxing short-term rentals, they're addicted to that revenue, and they're not going to ban short-term rentals because they want to keep that tax revenue flowing. So that's a good sign. So that's just knowing how to mitigate that risk, knowing how to avoid certain markets is really, really important.
And another way that we mitigate risk is thinking through a backup plan. If something does happen, what kind of alternatives can we make it into a long-term rental? Can we make it into a midterm rental? And then we're doing things like forcing appreciation, so increasing the value of the property. And so if something happens and we have to get rid of it, it's already worth more, so we can sell it and walk away with money instead of having to sell it and come to the table with money when we sell.
Yeah, and so the next one I think is really important is having a great community to help you identify blind spots. And, this just kind of reminds me of when we got started, we were doing this all alone and we didn't have anybody to bounce ideas off of, kind of share what's going on, help with figuring out how to deal with certain issues. And there's only so much information that we had, and we really needed other people to be able to see the problem from different perspectives, their different experiences, to help us identify blind spots and avoid mistakes. And that's where having a great community of people around you is really important. So really it's about finding like those 4 or 5 other investors who are in your market, who understand different aspects of the market that you might not have, and help you identify those blind spots and work together. I think so many of us really tend to work alone and we don't want to kind of share some of our issues or mistakes. And I think that is actually a mistake, which is not sharing what's going on and getting some help and perspectives from other people. And then finally, the topic that we're really going to focus on today, and we're going to focus on a lot of these other topics in future sessions, but today we're going to really focus on knowing how to analyze deals. All right. And so for analyzing deals, the tool that we use and we really recommend is a cash on cash calculator. So what you're doing is you're calculating the cash flow. Now, I know there are a number of different metrics out there that you could use, but we really think cash flow is really king, right? It's what defines what's an asset versus liability. And if you've read Rich Dad Poor Dad, you know that the goal should be to accumulate assets, the things that are putting money in your pocket, and getting rid of liabilities. Those are the things that are taking money out of your pocket. So you can imagine if you accumulate a lot of assets, you got money flowing in all the time into your pocket. Your pocket's getting bigger, right? And then you're essentially eliminating the things that are taking money out of your pocket. So your wealth will grow very, very quickly that way.
And cash flow for us physician investors, this is what sets us free, because that cash flow coming in every single month, you can imagine if you have a couple short-term rentals and you're bringing in 150 or 200,000 in cash flow every year, what difference that makes, because that's what replaces your income. You can force appreciation and make your property worth hundreds of thousands of dollars more, but that's not going to replace your income. You can get those tax savings and you get a chunk of money, but that's not going to replace your income. It's ultimately the cash flow that replaces your income. And that's why we love real estate, even compared to like stock market and things like that, because that if you buy a property right and you get that cash flow every month, that's what sets you free to work in medicine as a choice. Not, you don't have to do it.
And so the formula is real simple. It's the cash on cash return is the cash in your pocket or the cash flow from your property divided by the total cash that you invest in the property. So if you kind of break it up, what's cash in your pocket mean? What does that mean? So that means that after you pay, you get your rental income, the revenue from all your all the different stays, the guests that are staying in your property, you add all that up. And then you subtract out all the expenses. And there's a lot of different expenses with vacation rentals. And you can see over here where it says expenses data, those are all the different types of expenses you have. And so when you take all that rental income and subtract out the expenses, then what you have left over is the cash flow. And so that, again, is the money that you put in your pocket. Now, one thing I wanted to point out is cash flow is different than what you file in your taxes. And you can, and I want to get too into this because we'll talk about this in a future, we'll talk about taxes in a future event series, but there's a way for you to really increase the expense column. And you can do that with something called depreciation. And that is just a paper expense. It's not a real expense. So on paper, it looks like you have a loss. And that's how you create those losses to shelter your income. But in reality, you're still cash flowing on this property. It's just that when you file your taxes, you're showing a loss. And that again is how you're sheltering that W-2 or 1099 income.
And I just want to point out that what we're going to go through is this cash on cash calculator. It does not take into account all the other ways you're earning money. And that's things like that forced appreciation that we talked about. The tax savings are not put into here either. The market appreciation of your property is taken into account in here. The amount your renters are paying down your mortgage is not taken into account here. This is just a very small part of the actual money you're making with your property. But what this does is this assures, if you're making cash flow, that this is an asset, not a liability. This is a property that makes you money every single month. And that's really, really important because cash flow not only sets you free, but it's also your buffer. If something happens, if you have enough cash flow, you can make it through some time. And just like I told you, if the market drops and your value of your property drops for 5 or 10 years, it's the cash flow that's going to allow you to hold on to this property and not be paying to support it for those 10 years. And so cash flow is really, really important because it's what sets us apart. So you're not just betting on something and hoping that it's going to appreciate. You actually are able to make money every single month out of it. And so it is an investment, not a gamble.
And I love seeing those questions. Keep those questions coming. I know that there may be some people who might think, oh, maybe my question's too simple or just a dumb question. There are no dumb questions. So please submit your questions because, if you don't get your questions answered, then, you're not going to be able to make progress, right? So getting back to that formula, I just wanted to kind of break that formula down real quick. So this is that cash flow, the cash in your pocket right here. And you're dividing that by all the cash that you invested in the property. And that includes your down payment, your closing costs, your repairs and renovation and furniture and other things. And that if you kind of do that formula, this divided by this, that's where you get this here.
I also want to point out that the cash and cash calculator is a living document. We use it when we're first analyzing a property to see if we want to put in an offer, and we'll do a rough cash and cash calculator and get a sense of, this could potentially be a good deal. I want to put in an offer. And then we're using it again during due diligence, where we're having an inspection and we're getting all the rehab costs. We're getting sense of how much is the furniture going to cost. We're getting our property manager in and getting more information about the average daily rate. And we pull out that cash and cash calculator again. We run it again to decide if we actually want to go through it and actually buy the property. Because with real estate, with rental properties, you actually have a lot of ways to get out of them. And so you can have it under contract, run your cash and cash calculator once you have a little bit of information and say, you know what, this deal no longer works. I don't want to buy it. Or this deal looks great. I'm definitely going to buy it. And then you can pull this out even a year later and look at how your cash and cash return is actually running at that point. And so it's a living document that way with one property, but it's also really useful because you can use it to compare one property to another. Because once you've run 10 or 15 cash and cash calculators, you start to say, you know what, this property is a better deal than this property. And then you just run a property, you have it, and you can compare it to every other property you saw before because you're consistently using the same cash and cash calculator, using the same variables. And so even properties you looked at a year or two ago, you can go back and refer to those and say, you know what, this is a better deal than what I was looking at before. So we save our cash and cash calculators that we run because we can go back and compare to deals we were looking at a couple of years ago.
7 years ago.
Yeah, and have a sense of how things are going. So this is a really important thing to save as well.
The other way I look at a cash on cash calculator is that this is your checklist, right? If you guys are in, do surgeries, you understand checklists and how important they are, right? And so this is a checklist where what you want to do is you want to be diligent about getting accurate information about every single peach colored cell. The peach colored cells are the assumptions. Those are the numbers that you're putting in. All the other numbers there that are not shaded, those are calculations, right? And so what your job is fill in the peach colored cells, get as accurate information for every single one of those variables. Some of those variables it's not just like looking up a variable. Some of them require quite a bit of extensive research, and we'll talk about that. But that's what this is. This is a checklist to make sure that you've investigated all different aspects of your property and you understand it. And if there's something you don't understand, like I was saying earlier, if there's a blind spot, then this is going to point that out.
And one thing I forgot to mention is when we're looking at, when we're doing the analysis often during due diligence, we're running multiple scenarios too. And so for the average daily rate, what if you only get 350, but you might get up to 550? You can run multiple scenarios and see at which point the daily rate no longer makes sense or the occupancy no longer makes sense to be able to buy that property. And so you run different scenarios too.
Okay. All right. So then let's kind of run through this real quick. So up here, what you're doing here is you're putting in, well, first I want to say this is actually our property and some of the numbers that we put in when we were analyzing this property. This is a property right on a river. It's in the mountains. It's a beautiful spot. And so this data here is your income. So income is comprised of how much are you charging every night on average across the year, and how occupied is your property. So over 365 days of the year, what percent of the time is it occupied? And this data actually we got directly from our property manager. And this is our low assumption, actually. Our property manager actually told us that our daily rate would be higher and our occupancy would even be higher. And so what we did was we were conservative and started, one scenario was this low scenario, right? And that's what Leti was saying, that we actually did 3 different scenarios: a low, a middle, and a high scenario, where we changed the different variables from a conservative all the way to an aggressive analysis. This was our purchase price, our down payment, closing costs. That's how much you pay to get the loan and also close on the property. And we have repairs and renovations. We actually updated the property and we forced some appreciation, which we'll talk a little bit about. We bought some furniture, obviously. Go
And
ahead.
I'm just going to say, when you're first starting out, estimating the repairs and renovation, it's going to be extremely rough.
Yeah.
And so when you're first starting out, you're just going to put some numbers in there, but you're going to get your inspection, and you're going to have your contractor go during the inspection and give you some bids, and you'll have a lot more data before you purchase the house if you do it right.
Yeah, and that's what we were saying about getting accurate data, right? Is making sure that every piece of information here is as accurate as you can get it. And the whole point of the due diligence period is to get more and more accurate information. That's your chance to go in the house, have a contractor walk the house, and give you an estimate of how much it's going to cost to do whatever you're looking to do. We talked about, so getting down now, this is the loan data. This information you get from your lender. Ideally, you have your lender set up ahead of time. You have a pre-approval letter. So they should be able to give you this information. That's the source of your information. And then coming down here, property taxes, this can be pulled off of the county website. Then you have insurance. You'll have an insurance broker, and you want to make sure that you're getting a quote for short-term rental insurance, which is completely different from regular insurance, regular homeowners insurance. And then this property is in an HOA. You remember we talked about the downsides and the possibility of an HOA ban. So we did think about that, and we thought about how can we mitigate that risk? Can we live with that downside? And so we definitely thought about that issue, no question.
And we had a backup plan. And the backup plan was, if the HOA decided that we couldn't use this as a short-term rental, we were going to force enough appreciation, we could sell it, or we were going to limit it as our primary residence.
Yeah, and to give you a sense, putting in $50,000 on this property, you saw that we put in $50,000 right here. Our agent told us that this property is already worth around 900,000, and
900 to 950.
Yeah, 900 to 950. Of course, there were some market appreciation in there, but a good chunk of that was forced appreciation. So even if there's a downturn, we feel pretty confident that we'll be able to sell this for more than 660. And so we can get out of this property if all of a sudden there's a ban on short-term rentals.
Yeah, and this is a property we bought at the end of 2020 at $660,000.
Then you have your property management fee. And so this is, you want to make sure you find a property manager in the local area and get real numbers here.
Yeah. And for long-term rentals, a lot of you are used to looking at, maybe 8 to 10% for that property management fee and, a lease up fee potentially. But for short-term rentals, it's often more in the 20 to 30% range, and there's no lease up fee. And so that's why we built the cash and cash calculator this way for short-term rentals.
The other thing to point out is that a lot of people in our community always put in a property management fee assumption. Even if they're planning to self-manage, they put in that assumption, because what they're trying to do is they're wanting to buy something that performs well even with property management in place. Because what you don't want to do is have it work okay without property management, and then if you put in property management, all of a sudden the cash flow goes to zero or negative.
Yep.
Next is maintenance costs.
And there's an argument for putting a little bit higher maintenance costs than you would with a long-term rental. So maybe even putting 8 or 10% just because you have so many people going through and you might have some damage. But there's also ways to mitigate that by having your renters pay for insurance that could replace, fix anything that they damage.
Booking fees, in our case, our property manager was paying those, but if you're self-managing, you will have some booking fees. Again, if you're sitting there going like, how do you know this? Like, where are you getting this information? Right? This is the level where you need to be in terms of your knowledge, right? You need to feel comfortable looking at something like that and going, oh yeah, I know exactly what the booking fee is. And I can tell you right now, I know the booking fee for Airbnb, VRBO. I know exactly how their fees work, right? That's the level of knowledge you want to get. That's how you avoid mistakes, right? Because if you didn't know what you were dealing with here, you might put in the wrong assumption. Lodging taxes, again, this is another really important one. You just have to know how taxes are handled in your area. And taxes can start out at the state. They can be in the county, it could be the city, it could be, right, it could be the town. There could be multiple layers of taxes that you're not aware of. So you really need to make sure you understand every single layer of taxes.
Yeah, and one of the keys is if you don't put the right numbers in here, it's garbage in, garbage out. You're not going to be able to predict how the property is going to perform. You really want to know how the property is going to perform before you make the commitment to buy it. And this is really, this cash and cash calculator is only capturing the first year. Ideally, this is a conservative look at what it looks like the first year, and the second, third year, it's even better than this, because now you don't have, the furniture costs, you don't have the repairs, renovations, and ideally you're increasing the price over time, you're adding amenities, you're making it more attractive. And so this is kind of a conservative worst case scenario, but year 2, 3, 4, it should be even better.
And the last several ones, supplies, utilities, cable, internet, those are pretty obvious. Other monthly costs for us, we had a hot tub and hot tub maintenance. So that's what that is right there. And so that's a pretty much catch-all for, random things that you might have that are not necessarily common across a lot of vacation rentals.
I do want to mention that there's also an instructions and disclaimer where you can find some of the just kind of guidelines for some of the assumptions. And so it'll kind of tell you where to go look to get them. So if you download this cash and cash calculator, you can check that out and get more details as well.
Yeah. And if you, if members of our team can actually put a link to our cash on cash calculator, that would be great. There are a number of articles. Metrics Made Easy would be, sorry, the one you talked about earlier, right? Short-term rental, long-term plans. That one has our short-term rental calculator in it. Okay, so with that,
can we just try one thing?
Oh yeah, sorry, yeah, that's true.
So watch what happens if you self-manage this property.
Right.
Just assuming this low average daily rate, and I will say that our average daily rate is probably around $550 right now.
I'm not going to put 0. I'm going to put in like 3 or 3%. Let's just say, just because you are going to have, most likely you're going to get some vacation rental software, and on top of that, we talked about how there are some booking fees and things like that. A few percent. So I'm going to put 3% in there. But yeah, you can see that if you go from 30% to 3% property management, your cash on cash return jumps from 11% to 22%.
And then if you increase the average daily rate to $550, which is kind of what we're doing now, and then we decrease the occupancy when we increase the rate, and that is going to make our maintenance better as well. And so you can see how one property that's a $660,000 property can bring in a ton of cash flow.
Yeah, that's what we were saying earlier. If you're self-managing this thing, you can make close to 6 figures, right? I mean, that's tens of thousands of dollars of cash flow. And I think that for a lot of people, a lot of us, I mean, that'll make a big difference in your life. And just remember, this property for us generated a $275,000 tax shelter. So we sheltered with this property $275,000. So the combination we talked about, cash flow $82,000 or $83,000, forced appreciation. The property is now worth $900, $950, and then we sheltered $275,000. So that's what we mean by a quick win, right? You don't have to quit your job. You don't have to cut back. You can do this working full time.
And this is not outside the norm of what people are doing for short-term rentals.
All right. Well, let's jump in. Hey, Jess. And we got a couple questions here. So let's, should we just pull from the Q&A?
Yeah, so we're going to pull from the Q&A and we'll answer some questions for about 20 minutes. If you guys put questions in the chat, you can feel free to throw them into the Q&A as well.
All right, Ashley, can you please share the calculator? Yeah, for sure. We can ask our team to put in that. Yeah, so if you go to, short-term rental, long-term plans, there's a calculator. You can download it from there.
Yeah, and that's a short-term rental cash and cash calculator. There's a long-term rental cash and cash calculator as well. That one's in the how to use your cash and cash calculator for success article that they can link in there too, if you want to run the backup plan of using that property as a long-term rental as well.
Yep. All right. Thank you for the talk. In this market today, there's a 30% to 50% increase in short-term rental properties. When you do the COC, it is always less than 15 to 20%, even without PM property management. Therefore, the math for majority does not make sense. What is your suggestion now? Can we afford to wait to go in? And how long do you foresee? Yeah. So, you know what? The real key here is learning how to buy good deals. And that's something that we cover a lot in our Zero to Freedom course, is learning how to position yourself to buy these deals, acting quickly, building relationships with agents so that they bring you these deals. A lot of the deals we buy are off market. They never hit the market, right? And the only way you can get those is having really good relationships with the people who are going to be bringing you these deals. And I'll tell you why we know that these deals exist at not 30 to 50%, but at prices from like a year or two ago. The reason we know this is that if you look at fixed up properties in any market, and you can tell pretty much like what's a fixed up property. and you kind of look at the price history, you can see that somebody bought that property 3 months ago for a huge discount. And that's how you know that these deals exist. And so that's what I would say is that, yeah, it's true. If you're looking at retail prices, and that's what you're doing when you're looking at Redfin or Zillow, that's just retail prices, right? But investors are not paying retail. They're buying wholesale or close to wholesale with maybe a little bit of a wholesale fee. That's what they're paying.
And I'll also add that it's really important to learn how to recognize hidden value. Mm-hmm. And sometimes, we were just talking to one of our students today, and they took a property that was a duplex actually, and it had a 1-bedroom unit in the back, and they turned it into a 4-bedroom unit. And you can imagine what that did for the value of the property. Well, if you can see a short-term rental and you can see an extra bedroom, or you can see an extra unit in the basement, that's when you can get to the level where you're making 30-40% cash on cash return, because you've tapped that hidden value that other people missed. And maybe it was even on market and people didn't even see it, or maybe it was mislabeled on the market. There's a lot of that as well. So there are a lot of ways that people are doing it. But people are making more than 20% cash on cash return, even with property managers in our community.
Can we tell them that little tip, the search tip? Okay. All right. Nellie, do you have a realtor's license? Is it recommended to get one? At which point should you consider this? All right. 1 second. All right. Do you have a realtor's license? So I do have a license, but it's not specifically for buying properties. So what I would say is that it really kind of depends on why. You really need to have a real good reason for getting a license. I would say for most investors, it doesn't make sense. There's not really a benefit. I wouldn't necessarily want to represent myself in a deal. It's kind of like, being your own doctor. It's like, you probably want somebody else to see you and evaluate you and treat you. And it's because, right, you're not necessarily objective, right? And you want somebody else's perspective and their experience. Same thing with an agent, right? You want somebody who's really experienced in their market, who really have built those relationships with people who are going to bring you deals, who know who the cleaners are, who the handymen are, right? You want to leverage their experience, their relationships and connections. And so, like, I don't really see a huge benefit in getting a realtor's license if you're looking to invest. If you're looking for a separate career and you're wanting to actually use the realtor's license for a specific purpose, then I think that, then of course, right, it could make sense. But again, you have to have a real specific purpose for what you're doing it for. If it's just for buying properties for yourself, I don't think it's a really great reason.
I think if you're looking to probably save the 3% fee, but the value that an agent can bring, it can far exceed that, especially if they bring you an off-market deal. It's worth so much more. And so we've always used agents for all of our transactions, even though Kenji even has an agent's license. We just don't use it for our own transactions. We'd rather pay somebody to make sure it's done well. Nothing's missed. It mitigates risk. And it also makes sure that we're doing the highest value efforts for our time, which is, making the relationships with the agents, forcing appreciation. That's where our energy should be, and building our portfolio, not negotiating, about one deal.
Yeah. You really want to make sure you're focusing on the most important things, right? So yesterday we were talking to a student who was talking about, I want to really learn more about these tax benefits, and can I read more about it and dig into it? And I was like, that's not really where you want to focus your energy. You want to focus your energy on finding great deals, because you can outsource that tax stuff to a CPA, right? A real estate CPA. That's what you want to do. You want to have the experts deal with that. And so it gets to Ashley's question here, which is, how do you shelter W-2 income using a short-term rental? And so if we can post an article, the tax benefits of short-term rentals, that article will kind of run through how you can do that. But just real briefly, you don't need real estate professional, but you do need to materially participate in the short-term rental, which means that you really need to be hands-on with the short-term rental in order to get the tax benefits. And you can't just be completely passive. You have to be really actively involved. And that's how you can take those losses and shelter your W-2 income. Ashley has another question. What do you think of a country vacation home, example, an hour from the DFW area? What are the prospects?
Actually, we have a friend who is
Yeah.
looking at a lake house, like just an
Yeah.
hour outside of Dallas. And we actually now own a short-term rental in Dallas as well. So.
Yeah. Ashay. Yeah. Sorry, Ashay. I said, so for some reason I saw it as Ashley. Ashay. Yeah. So you know, I can't specifically comment because I don't know exactly where that is, but yeah, I mean, like you have to assess the market, right? You have to assess the demand. Maybe you can create demand. Like there's something called being a destinationaire, which means that you actually make a non-destination into a destination. There are ways you can do that, right? By writing blog articles about an area, you know, talking about the highlights of an area and getting people interested in coming there, right? But you know, I don't know. It just depends on what the situation there. I would also think about competition, right? So you could be in an area that doesn't have a lot of demand, but if there's very little competition, you can actually do really well.
I would also think about the rules and make sure that that the area is collecting the taxes on short-term rentals, because again, that adds the stability that it's less likely that the city is suddenly going to put a ban in place. But ultimately, what's an attractive short-term rental comes down to the numbers and the risk, and you know how comfortable you feel with the performance that it's going to perform with the numbers, but then how comfortable you feel with your backup plan, and also making sure that there's less likely to be that short-term rental ban.
Yeah, and then one other thing I wanted to point out is that you can make a property stand out, right? So what you do to the property makes a huge difference. And I'll give you an example. A lot of people are buying properties in Pigeon Forge, Tennessee, right? And so this is like, if you kind of look at the website, there's like hundreds of these log cabins. They all look exactly the same, right? So if you're just like vacationing there, how do you pick one? You just kind of like throw a dart on a board and that's how you pick one, right? But what you want to do is if there are hundreds of cabins that all look the same, you got to figure out a way to make yours stand out, right? Otherwise, you could be losing money on your property. So what I would say with you, Ashay, is that, again, make sure that you've, mitigated risk. You thought about, if there are actually people going there for vacation, and you also want to make sure you stand out among the crowd. And then your other question about the lake house, I think what I would think about there is, the good, bad, and ugly. I would focus on a lot of the ugly, and I would think about things like flooding, right? I would think about some of the downsides of owning a lake house, but it could be very attractive from a guest perspective. I mean, guests love being on the water, right? And that's why we bought a house on the river. But we had to think about things like flooding and think about the river. It's a very, very, in the wintertime, that river is wild. And you see logs coming down it. It's pretty scary sometimes. And you have to think about those types of issues, people falling into the river. You got to worry about that.
But we've also mitigated risk. We had short-term rental insurance. We put up a fence. Yep. We did a bunch of things to mitigate that risk as well.
For sure. Putting up signs and fences. All right.
Tax benefits of midterm rentals. So midterm rentals are effectively considered long-term rentals. So the definition of a short-term rental for the IRS is 7 days or less with an average length of stay over that calendar year. And so if you have a midterm rental that's renting for 30, 60, 90 days, if your average length of stay is over 7 days for that year, then it's going to be considered a long-term rental. One of the amazing things about midterm rentals is you can get oftentimes higher cash on cash return. If you have it financed and you're having those 30, 60, 90 day stays, they can actually pay more than the longer term tenant that's staying the whole year. And so we have a lot of students who have duplexes or fourplexes, and they're running them as midterm rentals, or running part of them as midterm rentals and part as long-term rentals, or midterm and short-term. So they're doing a combination of all of them. All real estate is tax advantaged because there are things like depreciation that we already described, that even if you don't materially participate or have real estate professional, that depreciation can shelter your rental income. And so the easiest, broadest way to kind of paint the picture is if most often your real estate income is tax-free. And then you have that chunk of real estate income coming in, and then you have your, working for your job and bringing that chunk of income. If you have a huge part of your income that's tax-free, your average income tax rate is effectively halved, let's say if it's 50-50. And that can make a big difference on kind of your growth of your wealth over time.
Right. So Ashay, our marketing expense is part of the other category of the calculator. So a lot of people in terms of marketing will list their properties on Airbnb, VRBO, and that's going to be, so it'd be, you would have some booking fees, right? But these companies invest so much money in marketing and getting customers to their website. That's the type of marketing most people are doing. Now, if you get sophisticated with your vacation rental, you'll want to create a direct booking website. And so you'll have your own website for your short-term rental. In that situation, yeah, you may want to run Facebook ads to your short-term rental. So those marketing expenses are not in the calculator. I would put that in the other category at the bottom. Yeah, just like you said. So Nelly, could you briefly explain forced depreciation? Yeah, that's when you can actually increase the value of a property. You force it, and the way you force it is with these short-term rentals is that if you do something like improve the kitchen, right?
Structural.
You do some structural changes, add a bedroom, add a bathroom. You increase the square footage somehow. You make another bedroom.
You add outdoor living space, right?
Outdoor living space. With that index cabin, the cabin in the river, we actually have a garage that we're actually going to convert into a 2-bedroom plus a whole playroom on the first floor. So we're going to significantly increase the footprint of that property, and we can actually now sleep not 8, but we're going to probably sleep, probably more like 10 to 12. So that's going to significantly increase the value.
And we could even have 2 separate bookings. So now we could have a 4-bedroom booking and a 2-bedroom booking, and you can imagine how awesome that is to be able to fill both of those properties, what it's going to do for a cash and cash.
Shay, what would be a good cash and cash rate for a short-term rental? A lot of our students aim for greater than 20% with property management in place. And following up, you talked about property management. Yeah, 30% is high, but that's fairly typical for vacation rental. I'd say 20 to 30% is probably the most common. You can find some places that do lower than 20%, and you can actually find places that do more than 30%.
Yeah, right. And this is why a lot of people self-manage, because it's a hefty amount. I mean, you saw with our cash and cash calculator, it's really the difference between cash flow of $30,000 range to cash flow in the $70,000 or $80,000 range. It makes a big difference.
Yeah. So self-management also from the tax benefit side of things. We were talking earlier about tax benefits of short-term rentals. If you want to get the tax benefits, then you're going to want to be actively involved. So in that case, a lot of our students they'll self-manage and they'll do everything themselves without a property manager.
And we self-managed for the first year to make sure we were getting material participation so we could get that tax benefit. And then the second year we handed it over to a property manager.
Yeah. Stephen, with the cash and cash usually being much higher for a short-term rental, say 20 to 30%, is it realistic to run a loss for tax shelter W-2 purpose on a yearly basis? So yeah, this is a great question. So no. So in your second year, it's most likely, because in the first year, you're creating a loss with something called bonus depreciation. And that's when you can take a huge chunk of depreciation in your first year. But in the second year and beyond, your depreciation drops down significantly. It's still significant, but it drops. And so what happens is that you're going to show a profit the second year and beyond. And so what you do is you have to change strategies. At that point, what a lot of people do is they will no longer either self-manage. They might have a property manager manage it, or they might continue to self-manage, but make it more passive, not track hours or anything like that. And then they buy a long-term rental, right? And they can create losses with that long-term rental and then shelter the short-term rental income, right? Which is, so it's like passive losses offset the passive income. And
or you can buy another short-term rental and actively participate and create active losses to shelter your other short-term rental income plus some of your clinical income. But basically you do want to keep buying in order to continue to shelter taxes.
Yeah. And yeah, so these are really advanced questions, Stephen. These are great. And so there is a phase out of this bonus depreciation. The phase out is starting next year. This year, it's still 100% bonus. Next year, it's going to drop down to 80. To answer your question, Stephen, I think that the bonus depreciation benefit is still really good, even if it was 0% bonus depreciation. But especially with 80, 60, 40, I think the bonus depreciation is still really great. But it's just going to be spread out over the first couple of years, 2-3 years. That's when the benefits are still going to be really, really good. So it's going to change your strategy a little bit, but you're still going to get a huge benefit out of bonus depreciation. Nelly, you included the principal in addition to interest for expenses in calculating the cash flow. Principal and interest, yeah, the principal and interest payment. So yeah, that I did include that as a cash flow, but you're right. you are building up equity, but that's not part of the calculator. Like we don't include the equity that you're building up. We're just focusing on cash flow. All those other things, you're right. Those are benefits, like the tax savings a benefit, forced depreciation is a benefit, and the debt pay down, how much your renters are paying down your mortgage, that's a benefit, but we're not including that. The way we look at it is that, that if you're making 20% cash on your short-term rental, that's the minimum, right? And then you add on to that
you're making
all the
much,
other benefits.
much more.
You're making much more than 20%.
Real estate is pretty incredible that way.
Yeah. All right. So do you use AirDNA, Mashvisor, or PriceLabs? Yeah, you can use any of those. Personally, we like AirDNA just because, we're really comfortable, familiar with that. But, those other tools are effective too. Don't have any problem with them.
And a lot of people do PriceLabs.
Yeah, a lot of people do PriceLabs. Yeah, we actually do PriceLabs as well, but we also do AirDNA. So we kind of do both. But we use PriceLabs for the pricing, dynamic pricing.
For the property that we self-manage with our team.
What vacation rental software do you recommend? We use OwnerRez, and we like it.
And we have a whole vendor profile for short-term rentals, so maybe we can put a link to that. But there's links to a lot of the stuff that we've tried and we use. We put that in our vendor referral program.
Yeah. So when you say shelter 275,000, does that mean saving like 137,000 in taxes? Well, I mean, I don't think quite that much. I mean, if it's an effective tax rate. So if it's a 30%, so even if your top rate is like, let's say 37, your effective tax rate is going to be lower, right? So
I often do the math at roughly 25% savings. And I think that basically is in the high 60s when you think about it.
I do 30% just because a lot of people are paying state income tax as well. So I do a little bit higher, but typically I do. So if it's 30, it'll be what? It'd be
like 80,000.
About 80,000.
In tax savings.
Yeah, and that's cool. What you get back in a refund in April when you file your taxes.
And what's really cool is if you're using it if you're using the second home mortgage, that's 10% down. And when you look at it that way, it's like the tax savings pay for your mortgage. It's pretty remarkable.
Yeah. So anonymous attendee, do you use the same entity structure as your long-term rentals, LLC, individual property owned by a Wyoming LLC? Yes,
we do.
Yes, that's what we do. And there was a recent article. It was actually a republished article on LLCs very recently that we put out there. If you want to learn more about our structure, Kim, how does this investor series differ from your short-term rental course? So this investor series is really just kind of like focused on the new investor and really, just educating. We're just kind of putting out free information out there just to get people to kind of, consider like, if short-term rentals could be for you, maybe. And we just wanted to kind of offer this educational series for our readers.
Yeah. And the short-term rental course is called Accelerating Wealth.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll ask my team to put the link to the wait list.
Mm-hmm.
That's going to be released at the end of March. And so if you guys decide that you do want to learn more about short-term rentals and build a portfolio, definitely get on the wait list and you'll be the first ones to hear about the short-term rental course when it's released.
Yeah. And the page also has a lot of information about the course, so you can just kind of scroll and read all about it if you want. Lois, if you bought a house at 170,000 with a HELOC, no down, no closing, and refi 165,000 out with 5K closing, do I put down and finance 170K or 165K? Let's see. No, refi 165.
So
Lois, I'm not quite sure I understand all your numbers. Those numbers are so close. I don't know if it makes that much of a difference, like what you put down where. But I'd have to look at it. I'm sorry. I don't know that I can do this. Maybe if you download our calculator and you post it in our semi-retired physicians group, I could take a look at it, but I just don't understand fully the scenario. But if you can write it out and explain it, then that'll be more helpful.
Yeah, and that's a great point. For those of you who are kind of running cash and cash calculators, you can always put them in the Facebook group and people can comment on them and you'll get a lot of advice from, or maybe not advice, but you'll get a lot of people weighing in and maybe seeing some of the blind spots that you missed.
Yeah. Anonymous attendee, do you ever use a second home loan? 10% down. Yeah. So that's one of the great things about the vacation rental is that, you can get in with 10% down. Right? And that's an amazing benefit. And there are some rules that you need to know about the second home loan, but it's really great for us. well, I guess why didn't we? I mean, I think we have so many investment properties. That's one of the issues. And also we were doing a jumbo, but jumbo you can also do, I think you can do 15-20% with a jumbo right now. Maybe it was 20% with a jumbo.
A lot of people are using the second home loan. And, when you look at our vendor profile caliber, who we work with as residential lender, they do those second home loans with 10% down.
Yeah. You know what? Sorry. Let me take it back. We did a jumbo with our more recent one, but the River House one where you saw we bought it for 660. The reason why we didn't do that was we bought it in cash, and then we did something called delayed financing. And when you do delayed financing, you can do the second home loan. You can only do the 25% down loan.
And also, I would not have been willing to just make occupancy at 50% for the first 12 months anyway. Although a lot of people do that.
That's true. It's one of the rules of a second home loan is that your occupancy can't be more than 180 days. So, Kimberly, what are your thoughts on making a short-term rental out of a single family home that's in a regular, safe suburban neighborhood, no mountains, beach, or major attractions?
We just did that with a Dallas property.
Yeah. And so, one of the things that we teach in our course is that there are 9 different customers that you can go after. And most people by default only go after one, right? They go after the vacation renter. So I think, if you're in a suburban market, as long as you can think about all the different potential customers you can serve, and there are a lot of them, then sure, absolutely. I think it's a great way to go about it. Okay, Raj, my understanding is that if you personally use your short-term rental for greater than 14 days per year, it's considered a second home, vacation home, and not an investment, and therefore can't shelter W-2 income. Can you confirm, clarify?
It definitely lowers your tax savings.
Yeah, so I'm trying to remember the exact rule, but the more you stay in it, the less the benefit from a tax saving perspective. But at the end of the day, right, if you're generating income and you stay in it, let's say you stay in it 6 months, but you generate 6 months of income, you still have to file it as, a rental, right? And so I guess from a tax perspective, I don't see why you couldn't use that to shelter W-2 income.
I think with the first year, though, you really do want to stay under the 14 days because, and ideally, it depends. If you have a second home loan, you do have to stay 14 days, actually.
You have to stay in your home, for 14 days. But if you don't have that, for us, we don't even hardly stay in our vacation rentals because we want to maximize our tax savings. Yeah, and Raj, I apologize that we're not like crystal clear on this, but I'll tell you the reason is that they change the rules on that second home loan, the requirements like all the time, and so it's like I'm mixed up because it's like I get different input and updates from our lender about the new rules, and so it gets confusing. And so what we do is we just talk to our lender, and our lender updates our community all the time about the latest rules. So, and
I would also say talk to your CPA because you want to be really mindful, especially if it's the first year, not to lose that bonus depreciation benefit.
Yeah, for sure. And don't mix up like the lender requirements and the IRS requirements. They're going to be very different.
Yeah. And the 10% is the other one, 14 days or 10% of total rental time.
Right.
So, we really minimize our time in our vacation rentals, to be honest.
Yeah. Okay.
However, a lot of people, when they're setting up their properties, they're working more than 4 days. And so that counts as a work day. It doesn't count as a day you're staying in your short-term rental.
I thought it was 8 hours.
I think it's 4.
Okay.
But again, check with your CPA. And so a lot of people are doing that as well. And that allows them to stay there, but they're also working on their property and they're getting hours for their material participation as well.
Aditya, do you have a recommended agents list based on the semi-retired physicians community experience that could be shared? Yeah, we do have one, but only through our courses. So Zero to Freedom, we have long-term rental agents, and our Accelerating Wealth course, we have short-term rental agents, and we have them for, so many markets. I don't know how many markets.
It's like 385 agents at this point.
Yeah.
The reason we don't share them publicly is it's really important to know what you're doing before you go to the agent. And so even in Zero to Freedom, which is a course we're doing right now, like people cannot get introductions to agents until week 4 because they have to know how to use the cash and cash calculator. They have to build an entire team. There are all kinds of requirements because we don't want to burn out agents. And so you really have to know what you're doing before you go to an agent, or you can totally burn that relationship and they can write you off as a non-investor and you're not going to get another chance with them.
Yeah.
So make sure you know what you're doing before you talk to an agent.
Yeah. And how you'll know is that you'll be like sitting there like, I'm not getting any deals. I'm not getting, any opportunities. And it's probably because you're at the bottom of their list. Right. And so a lot of it is you just have to learn how to work with them and build that relationship. It's really important. Priya, what features, upgrades to a property help to force appreciation? Thanks for the advice. So I listed a couple. So adding a bedroom, increasing the square footage, adding a bathroom, improving the kitchen would definitely be one.
And I'll mention that with long-term rentals, if you increase the income and decrease expenses, you're going to force appreciation of that property. With short-term rentals, it's a little bit more squishy because you don't see a lot of people buying a short-term rental based on the income that it's bringing in yet. I don't know that maybe that's going to happen more in the future, but right now, when you go to sell a short-term rental in a single-family home, you're getting it appraised and it's getting compared to other short-term other single-family homes, and so your appraisal isn't going to reflect the income that you're bringing in of that property. It's just going to be compared to other properties for sale for people for primary residences, and so because of that, a lot of the things you're making to force appreciation are more structural and not necessarily increasing income and decreasing expenses.
Okay. Loretta, I'm considering doing a 1031 exchange from one of my other investment properties, a long-term rental in another state, into a vacation home in Vail, which is near my home in Denver. Clearly, we would love to use the Vail short-term rental for our own use, but I know that there are restrictions on how much you can use the property.
Yep.
However, after closing on a Vail property, would I ever have the chance of converting the property out of the restricted investment property use so I can stay up there for longer? When I am making so much money that I do not need to have my full-time job anymore, so I can use the Vail property more?
Yeah, so I don't know if she's talking about turning it into a primary residence, which is possible.
Or just a regular second home. Yeah, if you're making that much money, yeah, just make it into a second home. So yeah, like I think Stephen was posting about the rule from the real estate CPA that, yeah, you can't stay in it for more than 14 days or 10% of the total rental time. Yeah, that's right. And sorry, earlier I was mixing up the second home loan with the IRS rules, but yes, you're right.
But if you're staying longer than 14 days, what happens is you start to eat into the amount of tax savings that you're taking. And so that's why I'm saying, especially the first year, you might not want to do this at all, but maybe the second year you're willing to take less in tax savings for that. But Loretta, people do, have something as a short-term rental for several years and then turn it into a primary residence. We've talked to our CPAs about that. And so if that's something that you decide to do several years in, definitely talk it over with your CPA and understand how it's going to affect your taxes. And so people do that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. All right, Kimberly, does property management include cleaning and trash? So no.
Sometimes.
Yeah, I mean, it can. Yeah.
Well, cleaning, I will say, is generally paid by the tenant.
Yes.
And so it's almost like it's not really a cost you usually build into your cash and cash calculator.
Some people make money with cleaning.
Some people do. That's true. But usually you're charging back the tenant for that. And then trash, it depends because, like, for example, we do pay for trash because we're in a rural area. That's part of our costs. No?
No. So the property manager, the cleaner, actually takes the trash, puts it in her car and hauls it out. So that's actually what happens. So it's part of the cleaning, and the guests pay for the cleaning. So there's actually not a line item for cleaning in the cash on cash calculator. And like I said, some people do make money off of cleaning. So that's something that's why it's not in the calculator. All right, Shu. Hey, Shu. What strategies do you recommend taking since bonus depreciation is getting phased out? Would you recommend doing a cost seg before and after the reno? Yeah. So, like I said, I think the strategy does change a little bit with bonus depreciation being phased out, but I don't think necessarily a whole lot. I think there'll be, adjustments that you make. Maybe you hold on to a property a little longer, but right now, yeah, it's crazy, right? Everybody is trying to 1031 into bigger and bigger properties to get that massive bonus depreciation. That's what we've been doing for the last several years. And with it getting phased out, I think there'll be some slowdown in terms of people buying and selling, but I still think that there's huge benefit to 1031ing into bigger properties. I mean, 1031 itself is a huge benefit. So I don't know that I would necessarily change too many
I think you
strategies.
still get a lot of the depreciation in the first
Upfront.
5
You
years.
do. Yeah,
if you're
even with the
gonna do
cost seg.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then I'll say that for the cost seg before and after, what we're doing right now is we're doing the cost seg before the renovation and then just tracking everything that we do with the renovation. And then our CPAs are taking that list of things that we did with the renovation, and then they're doing the bonus depreciation on that. So we're not actually doing another cost segregation. Our CPAs are kind of doing it for us.
Yeah, because why do you don't need a cost seg if you have the material cost for every single component on your renovation, right? So
some CPAs though prefer to have a cost segregation company do it the second time because they want somebody who is not them to give that final yes. And so our CPA feels comfortable doing it, but not all CPAs do.
That's true. And our CPA actually, I think in large part, they'll also do and this is really important. They'll also do kind of like what's a repair versus what is a capitalized expense. That's also something they do, and so that turns out very favorable if they treat a lot of it as repairs. So something you may want to talk to your tax accountant about. Arshia, what does a property manager do? So everything from, it's all that activity that if you were self-managing, what you would do is you would, list your property on Airbnb, you would interact with the guest when they text you and go, hey, I'm locked out, or I can't get in, or I need X, Y, and Z, right? So they're going to be texting you and messaging you, and they'll do all that stuff. You also have to coordinate the cleaners, handyman. So that's what a property manager will do. They'll handle all that stuff. And if you're self-managing, you handle all that stuff. Ashay, is there something like real estate professional status equivalent for short-term rentals? Yes. And also, is there a certain hour requirement? Yes, the hours requirement, it's in that article, the tax benefits of short-term rentals, and it's called material participation. There's 7 different tests, and there are 3 very common ones that you want to look up. Okay. All right. So
we're just going to do a couple more. And then the ones we don't get to, if you guys can put it in semi-retired physicians, we'll go in and take a look and answer them later.
Yep. Okay. So Loretta, well, one thing I could do also do the copy as well. So Loretta, I'm considering, we already did this one.
Yep.
Okay. Karina, if you don't use the total tax shelter, the bonus depreciation, does that carry on to the next year? Yes. So it's not the tax shelter. Well, it's bonus depreciation creates a loss, and that loss is carried forward if you don't use it. So Nelly, do you have references for realtors by region? Yes. Okay. All right. We talked about that. What's the link for the Facebook group?
Can you guys put in semi-retired physicians, please, so they can find that?
Anonymous attendee, I've heard horror stories about bad tenants, property managers, unreliable realtors. How does one work on building your trustworthy team at the very beginning? Yeah, it's just, part of it is you just have to have faith that most people are good. They're not looking to scam you, and then it's just a matter of building human relationships, right?
And also having a community. So as part of our communities, everyone helps each other by sharing resources and vetted contractors and vetted property managers and things like that. And so that was that community piece that we talked about earlier, which is get a community around you who are doing the same things, investing in the same markets, and who can share resources that are actually vetted with you.
Okay.
Okay, guys. So we will take the rest of these, and Kenji will put them into Facebook.
Yeah, I'll answer the questions below the video. Okay, so you'll get answers to these questions. And if you have any follow-up questions, please let me know. There are a couple people in here that I might not be able to tag. If I don't have your name, I'm not going to be your full name. I'm not going to be able to tag you, but I will try to tag you as well. But if you don't get tagged, be sure to just check under the video and I'll answer your questions.
Yeah, and we'll be doing this again in, I think, a week and a half or so, 2 Tuesdays from now.
Yeah, so next week we're going to be at an event all week, so we'll do it
the week after.
The week after, but yeah, we plan on doing this every week after that, right?
Yep.
For several weeks.
Okay.
So, okay.
Thank you all for joining us on a Friday night. Hopefully you learned something about short-term rentals and are excited to start your own portfolios. It's really fun, and cash and cash return is amazing.
Yeah. Okay. Bye,
okay,
guys.
good
Bye,
night.
Sam. Bye, Raj.